To this, another episode of A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is where we break down and discuss episodes of TV shows that you may not have even heard of. I believe these TV shows need a little more love, and that is what this platform is here to do. Each week we will be covering different shows from all over the globe. We'll be breaking down each episode, giving you the main highlights, and going through it bit by bit. But for now, I think it's best that we find out what's on the menu today. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 5 of season 8, and I have done that intro 3 times now, so I'm glad I fucking nailed it at last. However, instead of talking about all my gaffes, we will be continuing our coverage of Clarice today. And as you guys know, I've been enjoying this series. I missed the fact that Hannibal didn't get a 4th series, and this kind of compensates a little bit, but, you know, I want Mads Mikkelsen back for that one last hurrah as Hannibal, and I want Hugh Dancy back as well. But I've got to admit, I do like Rebecca Breeds as Clarice. I think she's got the accent down really well. It's very much a bit like watching Jodie Foster in the way that she is, and the cadence of her voice. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I think she's really done a great job doing this character. But as for this character, what do we know so far about her? So we know that after the events of Silence of the Lambs, she went into therapy, and then she has been recruited by the Attorney General to go on to Paul Krendler's team. Paul Krendler was part of the team that was investigating Buffalo Bill, and he doesn't like Clarice that much because she managed to upstage him, and he feels a little bit hard done by for that. But we also know that as this season's gone along, he's started to trust her a little bit more and trust those instincts. He realises that she isn't a one-off, that it wasn't just a fluke that happened, but actually she's really good at what she does. But he just has to trust the way that she does things, which he doesn't seem to want to do from time to time. But it's also been proven that she shouldn't probably do some of the things that she does. She acts a lot on instinct and ends up getting into more bother than it's worth. For instance, at the beginning of the show, she ends up in a situation due to 3 women dying, where she ends up in the hands of a hitman, and it seems at first that this guy's a serial killer, but actually he's been hired by someone. But due to Clarice's nature, she ends up in a situation where she ends up basically alone with this guy. Yes, one of her teammates was there, but he was ineffective at this point, and she had to shoot this guy. As for the last episode of the podcast, we saw that Clarice ended up in a situation where she was in a hospital, and the person who was running that, well, it was more of a hospice, but the person that was running that hospice was actually drugging the patients that were in there, and she ends up drugging Clarice because Clarice comes alone. While Clarice is in there, she tries to escape and gets knocked out by a guy who is trying to cover up everything that's been going on, including the murders at the start of the series. So this is the guy who is basically hands-on with this whole operation, whatever it is. And it turns out that at the end of the last episode, Clarice actually saw this guy's face clearly for the first time, and it was actually Paul Krendler's lawyer. And so coming off the back of that, we are now going into the next 4 episodes with that knowledge. So I think we should just get into it. So this is Clarice, Season 1, Episodes 7 to 10. Episode 7, Ugly Truth. And so, like I said last episode, this show just keeps going from different trope to different trope. And in this episode, it ends up being a cold case that they find. And so, it seems that while a construction crew have actually been doing some renovations on a house, they've ended up knocking through a wall, and inside, flies have started to gather. And then when they've opened the wall up, they've found the body of a young boy. I say young, he's teenage, but still sad enough. And so Krendler tells the team that they have to do what they have to do. They have to start looking into what happened to this boy. Clarice wants to remind him that it's not only the boy they need to look into, they still need to look into these murdered girls. And so he splits the team up, but puts Clarice with Ardelia Mapp, and it's going to be Ardelia's first time out in the field. However, just as Clarice is about to leave his office, she spies a magazine, and on the cover of the magazine is a man that she recognises. And it turns out that this is the lawyer that Paul has hired. She tells Paul that is the man who hit her. That is the man who was at the hospice that day. Krendler obviously doesn't believe her, but he's got no cause to doubt her right now. Yes, she'd been knocked out, but she got a good clear vision of who it was. And so he puts another member of his team on it. But Krendler also heads out to meet up with the man in question. Because obviously Krendler is still getting a divorce and still needs to make sure that his family is kept safe. While talking to his lawyer tells him that he can make this happen, but they may need to use nefarious means. Basically, dragging up old things about his wife so that they can make sure they get the right result. But Krendler tells him he doesn't want to do that. That's not his way, and that is not the way that he wants to do this with his wife. Like I said before, they seem to be quite amicable. Clarice, however, heads out, and her and Ardelia start to question people in and around this poor child's death. They obviously go to speak to the mother, and they speak to some family members and some family friends that are around the house at the time, just offering support, including the neighbour Mary Beth Kern. They're all asked to give DNA to just rule everyone out, and one of the uncles of the young boy tells them that he doesn't want to, and that is it really necessary, and he seems to be protesting quite a lot, and this raises Ardelia and Clarice's suspicions of this man. Everybody else complies, and they get the information over to the lab for it obviously to be processed. While Krendler's team are actually following this lawyer, after he meets with Krendler, he heads over to a place called Alastair Pharmaceuticals. And this is the pharmaceutical company that was holding the trials that the women were part of, and those 3 women had died. And they were also trying to expose whatever happened in there. And so Krendler can't quite believe that this guy is still part of this. And any time that his staff question him about this, he kind of shrugs it off, as if this man can't be the person you think he is. And he even justifies it as the fact that it was coincidence that this man went over to Alastair, especially after the fact that Clarice had named this guy in this whole conspiracy theory. Clarice and Ardelia get the results back from the lab, and it turns out the DNA actually belongs to Mary Beth Kern, and she gave it over willingly. But this was mitochondrial DNA, and I'm impressed I fucking nailed that word. But it was, and that means that it could be passed down as well. So, when they start to ask Mary Beth about this, and she is adamant it isn't her, they ask about her son, because the crime that was committed was with a hammer, and it seems like it's more what a man would do than what a woman would do, because the murder was messy. And obviously, Clarice being a profiler, that's the kind of thing that she would be looking for. Mary Beth, however, she doesn't know where her son's gone. She hasn't seen him in such a long time, and she can't tell Clarice the last time that she saw him. It's only her and her partner Jerry that live in their house. Clarice heads upstairs to use the bathroom, and while she's there, she does the usual sneaky detective thing and starts to have a look around. However, she finds a photo of Mary Beth when she was a lot younger, with her son, and her son has a very distinctive mole above his eye, the very same mole that her husband Jerry had. Clarice comes back down and she starts to talk to Mary Beth and asks about who Jerry actually is. And it turns out that Jerry was actually her son, and she had been abusing him since he was 14, and made up this story that she needed a husband once her actual husband left, and she needed her son to step up to the role. And so it would seem that they've been doing everything that a husband and wife would do, and Jerry had just been conditioned to do this. However, when he spoke to the boys about this, because there wasn't only one boy but 2 boys that had been killed in the area, when he spoke to them and told them all about this, because he's still young and still naive in the head, he never grew out of that, he's still locked away in there somewhere as a child, and he talks to these young boys about it, and it seems like these boys were going to actually start to tell people, and so he killed them to try and keep their silence. But eventually their story has to come out, and Jerry is obviously arrested for the murder of the boys. But Mary Beth is also arrested for the abuse of her own son. After congratulations all round, Krendler gets a phone call from his lawyer. His lawyer basically tells him that he needs him to drop the case of the River murders. And if he doesn't, he has a lot of information about his kids and his wife. And he is willing to put that in the hands of some very bad people. So he needs to get rid of this right now. Otherwise, his family is in danger. Even though he is getting ready to divorce his wife, he doesn't want his kids exposed to anything either. And so Krendler comes out and tells the team that they need to start to drop this whole conspiracy theory because the Attorney General wants it. So they just have to stop now. They have the killer. They know who it was. And so they have to put an end to it. And Clarice is obviously fucking pissed at this. So now we're going to probably see Clarice going against the grain once again, as per usual, and getting into more fucking bother. Episode 8, Add a Bead. So like I say, this show keeps just changing things up as it goes along, and this episode deals with some quite heavy subjects. I know we've not been on the lightest of subjects when it comes to this show so far, but, you know, it really does seem to get darker as we go along. It does seem a bit like Hannibal in that regard, that Hannibal ended up being incredibly dark and didn't exactly start in a great place. Clarice is having therapy, and as she talks to her therapist, she starts to talk about the day before, and it would seem that Clarice has been investigating a suicide. However, when this comes across her desk, it's because she's actually still investigating Paul Krendler's lawyer, a man named Joe Hudlin. But of course, we know that Krendler has told them not to. And so Clarice and Escobar go and speak to the assistant of the Attorney General. And it turns out that there has been another death. And this time it is also connected to this case. But it turns out that this girl has died by suicide. And so generally this would have been swept under the carpet. It's not something they would need to investigate because it's just a suicide. Of course, police would have to investigate it, but the FBI wouldn't touch it. But since the assistant to the Attorney General knows that Clarice is looking into this, she hands over the file and the paperwork as to what actually happened. This girl, it turns out, was also part of this trial, this drug trial that was happening, and so believes there may be more to it than what is being let on. But it seems like a pretty cut and dry case. There doesn't seem to be any signs of struggle at the site, and the woman fell off a bridge. But as Clarice starts to look into it, she starts to discover more and more irregularities as to who this woman was and why potentially she could have killed herself. Now, they interview a colleague of hers, and it turns out that she was happy in the States and she was trying to get her husband to come out and be out there with her. She was actually originally from Yugoslavia, as it was way back when. So that obviously dates this show to the late 80s, early 90s, as we suspected before. But the man that she interviews, a man named Tyson Conway, seems very genuine in his affection towards this girl. And it seemed that she was quite integral to this charity that Tyson had set up. And so when they bring her in, he seems genuine. He seems like he really is sad about all of this. And after his interrogation, he ends up speaking to Clarice again, because Clarice finds evidence that not only was she married, that Tyson also mentions, but that her ring had been removed from her finger, which obviously means that either the killer took a trophy or she took it off herself. And so she asks Tyson about this, and he says she would have never taken that ring off. And he wants to know if there is any information about her that Clarice lets him know. But what's interesting about this interaction is Clarice generally is all about business. She isn't one for relationships. She doesn't tend to look for a relationship in anything. Especially in this series, she's never looked interested. But with this guy, this Tyson, it seems that she has a connection with him. And when she speaks to her therapist about this, her therapist seems quite optimistic that because Clarice doesn't have anyone in her life, that maybe this person could be someone. The rest of the evidence that Clarice finds is that she finds out that this girl had a lockbox. And when she heads over to the bank with Escobar, they find out that she'd actually been pregnant at one point. Now, whether it was a recent pregnancy or not, we don't know. But it would seem that she may have been pregnant before the fall, and that may be why she ended up dying. But the autopsy doesn't seem to reveal anything, and it's pretty inconclusive whether she was pregnant or not. And if she was, who was she pregnant to? Because her husband wasn't in the country. And so it seems that this case is asking more questions than it's answering right now. Why has this woman killed herself? We're totally unsure at the minute. However, Krendler has made a choice. He goes to see his lawyer, Joe Hudlin, and even though the last episode he basically threatened him, Hudlin is being smug. He's out in public with Krendler, and basically he's just being a smug prick. So he basically keeps the threat up, saying that Krendler won't get a hold of his kids if he doesn't play ball. So he needs to keep everyone off the river murders, and everything would go smoothly for him. Especially when Hudlin's got evidence that Krendler may have tampered with evidence, because we know that record logs were changed, and it seems like he may have Krendler over a barrel here. As he leaves this meeting, however, he leaves a pen on the table. Krendler takes it knowing that he can get DNA off of it, and hopefully he can get the DNA that Clarice had previously, and if they're a match, they can go after him. Of course, it turns out that that is a match. And now Krendler has a big decision to make, and when he goes and speaks to his son essentially, talking about a totally different aspect of his life, tells him that the way you raised me was to not lie. The way that you raised me was to be a decent human being, and the way that you raised me was to follow the law. And so Krendler knows he has to do the right thing, and he calls for a meeting with the rest of the team, but he ends up doing it in a basement because he knows that people are watching. And he tells the rest of the team, including Clarice, that they need to bring this guy down now. They can do it because they have evidence that he was there when Clarice was attacked, and they can get him on that straight away. But with this whole suicide case, the murders, Clarice knows that they have to go further. And when Krendler leaves the ball in her court, she tells him, this is what we're doing. We're going after him for the full thing. Episode 9, Silence is Purgatory. And so Clarice and the team are continuing to investigate these murders and this death. And it seems like they are setting up in this little basement that they've found to make sure that they can actually start doing some work on this. And so as they do, they start to investigate this pharmaceutical company, because the drug trial that was being offered has ended up playing a part some way in the death of these women. They weren't killed by it, but they were about to report on it. And it was because they all ended up pregnant, and the children ended up with defects over multiple years as well. And the girl from the last episode who had died when it looked like an apparent suicide seems now to be fitting well into that category as well. So we know that there's at least 4 bodies. When it comes to this drug, Clarice decides to go after a woman who is an accountant at this firm. And when she goes to speak to her at her house, it turns out that this woman isn't very happy to try and help her out, because there is a lot riding on it for her. She will end up losing her job if this gets out that she helped the FBI, and she'll never be trusted again in any other role. And since her partner is very sick at this point, it looks potentially like cancer, that she really needs the job, because it's a well-paid job, and it also covers medical expenses, so they can get her cancer treatment, or whatever treatment it is, and they don't have to think about the bill. But when Clarice mentions to them that there is dead women involved, they know that they have to do something. And so this accountant starts to look into the history of this drug and actually finds some anomalies within it, and especially the payment side of things. And so she heads over to Clarice and she hands over the documents, but while she's there, she lets Clarice have a piece of her mind, because this woman is trans. And while she was listening to everything that happened with Buffalo Bill, obviously Buffalo Bill was deemed as a trans character. And because of the way that Buffalo Bill was, and he was killing women, and it sent a bad message to that community. And this woman feels like she can't be herself, because nobody stood up for her outside of her community. And now everyone thinks that trans people are monsters, which is far beyond what they actually are. They're just people. They're just trying to live their life. One of the other members of the team is told to go and look into the drug reps that actually work for this company. However, when he does, he finds that the drug rep he's actually working with doesn't want to talk to him at first. This is how they get the name for the accountant, because she shows him a check that states how much she is actually getting paid, and he cannot believe the amount. But also, when he sees the name on it, He asks if he can have a contact detail for her. This turns out to be the woman that Clarice ends up talking to. But this representative, because she opened her mouth, ends up dead at the hands of whoever is still doing this. So that ends up being another victim of this crime. Krendler keeps up his investigation of Hudlin, but even though he seems not to want to play his hand too much, he ends up throwing some pictures on the desk of the girl from the previous episode, and he starts to interrogate his lawyer about this. And it just seems like a daft move, because they're trying to keep this on the down low, but he's basically telling the guy that they're still investigating him. It seems a little bit silly, in all fairness, from Krendler. I think he's really done a number on his team here, and himself. As for Ardelia, she is having a real tough time of it. After everything that happened with her and Clarice, and they solved the case of the young boy that was dead, a new task force has been greenlit, and Ardelia would be ideal to lead that team. However, when she actually puts her name forward for it, she gets told that it's not the right time for her. So when she ends up back in her office, and a guy comes in that she used to go to Quantico with and tells her that we were always a team, like, I want you to come and work this task force with me. She can't believe that she's basically been overlooked because she's a woman and because she's black, whereas this is a white guy that is now heading up a task force that doesn't know fuck all about it and has the gall to go and speak to Ardelia and ask, can you train me on the thing that you know more about and also come work for me? So because she's so pissed off about all of this, she ends up wanting to take them to court on this. She goes to sue the FBI, but when she speaks to a lawyer about this, he says, is there any chance, because of your connection to Clarice, that maybe we can actually do something with this? He wants to make sure that Clarice is front row centre when it comes to Ardelia's issues with the FBI and their hiring and firing of people. And so Ardelia has to go and speak to Clarice and make sure that the air is clear, but Clarice knows what's coming. Clarice at this point is the most famous FBI agent on the team. Everyone knows her name. And so if someone is suing the FBI over this, it will rattle a few cages. As for Catherine Martin, Catherine has managed to step outside for the first time in a year since the Buffalo Bill incident. And she goes out to meet her ex-boyfriend. She thinks that this is the new start for her, that she's going to get back to her old life and she's going to start to enjoy what she had before. However, the boyfriend tells her that in the time that he's had alone, he met someone else and that this was just a courtesy call. He didn't want anything big out of this. He just wanted to make sure she was okay. And this pushes her over the edge, because all along she's wanted to go and find Buffalo Bill's mother. And now that she's been able to step outside for the first time, she's more determined than ever. And so she started to look into getting out to where his mother lives, and has also started to look at timetables for bus trips down there. Episode 10, Motherless Child. And after the fact that she's become so bold, Catherine Martin has decided to go out and find James Gumb's mother. Obviously, she's been out once in the real world since the whole incident, and that is a recent event. We covered that in the last episode, but she's now decided it's time to hop on a bus and head across the state to try and find this woman. And as soon as Senator Martin finds out that she's gone, of course, all hell breaks loose. She rings Clarice and she tells her that she doesn't know where she is, and she's worried for her safety. After the last time she disappeared, obviously, you would be. The last time she obviously disappeared was when she was kidnapped. So everybody starts to worry, apart from Clarice. Clarice has a good idea of where she is. The only problem is she doesn't know how to find this woman, because James Gumb was actually disassociated from his own parents. His mother wasn't in a good place to actually look after him when he was younger, and she put him in the system for a while. When he actually came out, he stayed with her mum and dad, but by the time that he was a teenager, he'd already killed his grandparents. He was such a messed up kid that his mother knew she couldn't do anything for him, and so he ended up this serial killer that we all know. The accountant Julia Lawson, who was given this information to Clarice about the inner workings of this pharmaceutical company, has started working on the investigation with them. It seems like she is acting as some sort of special counsel on this, because she knows the numbers and she knows what's going on. But obviously, they're trying to keep this hush-hush, so she's basically told that she can't really say anything to anyone. They need to keep this on the down low. But while she's working with Clarice, obviously, Clarice is now putting out fires in different locations, so she has to try and work with the team to try and find out what the hell's going on and who is the man behind all this conspiracy, while also trying to find out where Catherine is and searching for her. However, when Catherine gets to see Lila, Buffalo Bill's mother, when she confronts her, she ends up striking this woman. And where this woman lives is quite a high stoop outside of her door, so when Catherine ends up hitting her, this woman falls from it and cracks her head open. Catherine at this point immediately thinks she's killed her. She drags her into the house and tries to treat her, but when she gets in there, she doesn't really know what to do. Eventually, after a while, this woman comes to, and obviously Catherine is quite relieved until she turns a gun on Catherine. It would appear that she has now recognised who Catherine is, but obviously Catherine, after her time with Buffalo Bill, has thinned out quite a bit, because she never wants to be in a situation where she is treated in that way. Let's not forget how Buffalo Bill was skinning these women. These women were on the chubbier side. He would then starve them until their skin started to hang off their frame, and then he would take pieces of them and try and turn them into a coat or into a bodysuit of some kind. And so now that Catherine's there, this woman has a gun pulled on her, and she tells Catherine that she wants to know why exactly she is here. Catherine just wants answers. She doesn't know where Buffalo Bill came from. She's still haunted by his memory, and she just wants to know who this person was and why he did the things that he did, why he was the way that he was. But his mother tells her that she gave him up when he was young. She didn't develop the person that he was, and it's only later when Clarice comes that she gets it out of her that James actually killed his grandparents. And so it is a total fucking mess. Clarice has to leave the team and have them looking into this whole financial situation to try and determine where the money's gone and who is benefiting from this crime that's been happening. Because 4 people are dead, and obviously this isn't looking good right now. Anytime that anyone actually starts to speak up, they get taken out. So it's obviously a cover-up of some variety, but they're just not sure where this leads yet. Even Crendler's lawyer, Joe Hudlin, who looked like he was part of this before, is still a major part of it, but it's only due to the fact that he's been paid. So he's obviously covering up something, but was he ever the killer? Was he the person that hired the guy who was killing these people? Obviously we know since that guy died in custody, another person has now died, so they're obviously still killing people. And so once Clarice finds out where Catherine is, she obviously heads over there. Again, I'm not sure if this one was in state, but it seems very convenient that she could just get there, but that's the magic of television. And she goes over to this woman's house. She tries to get in, but Catherine won't let her. And so when she heads round the back, she comes in gun drawn. Catherine obviously wants answers as soon as Clarice turns up. She's managed to get the gun off this woman and is holding her hostage now. Clarice has a gun trained on Catherine and is ready to fire, because obviously if Catherine kills someone, then she has to take her down. Catherine can't understand the fact that this woman has nothing to do with how Buffalo Bill was raised, and that it has to be something to do with her because he stole part of her life. It turns out that Buffalo Bill has been in and out this foster system for, well, he's been in 11 foster homes, so you can just imagine how bad he was. And again, we know that he killed his grandparents. He was just a fucked up kid. There's no explanation for him other than that. And so Catherine just cannot accept this. Eventually Catherine realises that she isn't going to get the answer she needs here. Her and Clarice talk it out, and she realises that she's going to have to go. She needs to go. As they leave Lila's house, though, Clarice heads across town and calls the Attorney General, Ruth Martin. Crendler is with her, and he tells her that they need to come back. But Clarice needs to do the right thing. She tells them that she's at a police station, and she is going to hand Catherine in because it's the right thing to do. She assaulted someone, and she broke into someone's home. So this needs to be sorted. It will probably end with a slap on the wrist, but because there are extenuating circumstances, but it needs to be sorted. To which, of course, Crendler is annoyed at, but he understands, and Clarice knows that this could be the end of her career. Clarice talks to her therapist about all of this, and we find out some more information about Clarice, or in fact, her father. So we know that Clarice idolised her father, and we know that her mother gave her up once her father had died. I don't know if I'd discussed that, but that is basically what happened. She kept her other children, but let Clarice go to foster homes. And so, before this happened, Clarice keeps remembering the best day of her life, when she was out with her dad, and he was doing a night shift, and he was out on the beat. He was driving around and she was in the passenger seat, and he always did things alone, and that's why Clarice always ends up going into these dangerous situations alone as well, to emulate her father. But then she remembers this one night which is the best night of her life. She sat in the car waiting for her father. She's not sure where he was at this point, but she was in a dodgy area, and in that area she saw 3 people down a back alley, and she's not even sure what happened, but she remembers it vividly now, and her therapist implies that maybe things aren't always as they seem, and that maybe Clarice has fictionalised her own ending for this situation by making it all sunshine and rainbows, when actually something more seedy was going on, and that maybe her father wasn't the person that she thought he was. Which obviously leaves Clarice in the last 3 episodes to really start to think about who her father was and who she really is, because she has modelled herself on her father so far. Yeah, this episode has a lot of twists and turns, and this series has had a lot of twists and turns so far. In the last 3 episodes, it seems to be calming down a little bit from the variation of different genres of TV, especially TV cop shows, and seems to be going more towards the final goal. But it's excellent. I honestly can't understand why it didn't end up getting a second series, because it is really good. The acting's great in it, and I think the storyline's fantastic. I know that in the States it's all about ratings, and, like with most things it's about ratings, but yeah, it was interesting to watch this episode and this last 4 episodes, because we've got a clearer idea of who Clarice is, or at least who she believes she is, with it obviously getting broken up in the last episode by her therapist. So going forward, it's going to be interesting. We obviously need to solve who this person was that has set this whole thing up, this whole conspiracy, and who has been covering up all these incidents. We also need to find out how Ardelia Mapp is going to end up suing the FBI, because she's been overlooked for certain things, and she's obviously going to be using Clarice's name as a stick to beat the FBI with, which isn't going to bode well for anybody really, especially her. And then you've got Krendler, who obviously has got this issue with his lawyer, where he is trying to get divorced, but his lawyer is essentially threatening him to make sure that he gets his kids. But the most important thing is finding out who Clarice is and who her father was. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting the next 3 episodes, and I can't wait to get into them. So I'm done for today, but anyone who has listened to this, thank you very much for listening. You're an absolute fucking star. All the usual things. Come find me on all the different social medias. I'm pretty much everywhere. All the links and all that good stuff are linked in my bio. So head over to my link tree. You'll find me. You'll find those books that I've talked about. And I hope you're all doing well out there. But for today, I'm done. So until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. And that is it for now, amigos. And yes, I am as angry as you are at me for that sentence, but I hope you enjoyed the show and had some fun along the way. It means a lot that you are listening and supporting me. This is an independent podcast after all, and doesn't get a lot of backing, so it is great to know that you're out there, you're listening. And if you want to come talk to me on any of the platforms I'm on, just come say hi. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm even a little bit on TikTok. I don't post that much, but I'm on there. And you can also drop comments in the comment sections on any of the platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you get your podcasts from. But as always, thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.